I'll ride my bike till I reach the highlands, where no one will know my name. Or I'll swim on my surfboard out into the ocean and sunbathe till I waste away. I whisper to the campfire, oh campfire, please teach me how to turn such simple things into light and beauty. Well, Moses saw God in a burning bush, one praying, please burn away my sins, hear my plight and soothe my feet. Oh, I walk to the river, see something in the stream. Maybe it's a siren or a rainbow fish's sheen. Or maybe it's Poseidon, won't this river reach the sea? But oh no, it's nothing, or at least nothing I can see. I'll ride my bike till I reach the highlands, where no one will know my name. Or I'll swim on my surfboard out into the ocean and sunbathe till I waste away. I'll waste away. Na oida, na oida, na oida, live and na oida, na oida, na oida, live and.
They tried to promote me to full-time at the gay bar. I told them I've got to finish my degree.
But I've just been drinking rum mixed with K-cider. Think I'll swap to rum mixed with Lambrini. I'll ride my bike till I reach the highlands, where no one will know my name. Or I'll swim on my surfboard out into the ocean and sunbathe till I waste away. Or I'll hitchhike real far, maybe get to Sri Lanka, or at least till my Kazakhstan breaks. Or I'll save all my money, fly out to Alaska, live in the woods the rest of my days, and I'll waste away.
Hello! Hello, chat. Hi. How are we all doing tonight? It is time for another chapter of The Stars and Their Children. Because I don't know when chapter 13 came out, but I think it came out in the past few days. So yeah. We're gonna be reading that today. I'm really excited. I love this story. I love Bones and the Bees' work, especially like Tommy and Its Clinic for Supervillains and Nocturnal Animals. Those are probably my favorite ones. Also, my OBS updated, and now everything is like in an even darker mode. Like this looks like dark mode, but it was already dark mode, so it's just like darker. If that makes sense. And it's really confusing. I mean, everything is relatively in the same place, so it's not like much has changed. Oh, but also, wait, I don't know if you can hear the music that well. Oh no, never mind. It was just really quiet for that specific moment. But also, happy September, everybody. In case you don't know what September is, you can get up to, I think it's 30%? It's either 20 or 30% off of a subscription for the month of September only. So if you've ever wanted to subscribe to me, for me to play Omori, hypothetically speaking, you could do it for less money. But it still supports me. Just a thought. I mean, it's just a thought. All right, let's get into it, shall we? I think we shall. Let's turn this off. There we go. Oh, like, oh, the white is like a harsh contrast with my sub-goal. Oh well. We vibe. Everything good? Also, anybody new watching this? This is your one and only warning for the stream. I do voices for the characters. It helps with my immersion. If it's cringe, I'm sorry. But also not at the same time. Alright. The Stars and Their Children by Bones and the Bees. Chapter 13. Constellations in the Ice. Summary. After the summit, someone new has arrived. I don't see any trigger warnings, so we should be good. The first morning after the leaders had left, Wilbur found himself alone. He woke up to Tommy yanking his boots on, sharing a half-hearted exchange with Wilbur about how he was being summoned to train with Technoblade once again. At this point, it seemed to be a near daily thing for Tommy to go spend his time with the Imperator, and while Wilbur didn't like this, he knew there wasn't much he could do about it. Tommy clearly enjoyed the time he and Technoblade spent together. Even if he tried to play it off, Wilbur knew he liked the training, and it wasn't hard to tell he was growing closer with Technoblade each passing day. Sometimes, Wilbur debated asking Tommy if he could join. If he was there, at least he'd be able to keep an eye on the two of them. See the kinds of things they talked about. Get an idea of whatever lies Technoblade was shoving into his little brother's head. But then Wilbur would remember being pinned to the floor. Then Wilbur would remember the uncomfortable weight of the dagger in his hand. Then Wilbur would remember how he didn't want to spend any more time with the Imperator than strictly necessary. Wilbur didn't want to go, and that was that. My PC doesn't like that, apparently. Maybe that made him a coward, or maybe that made him pathetic. He should have cared more. The worry that hummed under his skin whenever he thought of what Technoblade could be telling Tommy should have been enough to get him off his ass and sticking to Tommy's side, even when he didn't want Wilbur there. But it just felt so hopeless. Tommy's ideas were already shifting. The summit had ended. Their only chance at gaining an upper hand was gone. You can hear me, right? I just want to make sure, because, like, when everything updated... Okay, it is coming in through the Yeti Nano. Okay, let me turn myself up just a little bit more. There we go. And maybe turn this down a tad. I'm trying to level things out a little bit. Because I don't know if... I think this should be fine. Alright. Sometimes, when Wilbur stared at his hands for long enough, he could imagine he was holding blazophane powder. Gold-orange dust would glitter like gemstones no matter how dull the light above them was, staining his palms as it slipped between the cracks of his fingers. Slipping, slipping, slipping. Their chances of success, the life they used to have, the future they had been raised for. He was losing it. No matter how tightly he tried to cup his hands together, it would fall through. Wilbur wanted to say he wasn't made for this, but he was made for this. Even though he was mad for this, or even though he was made for this, his molding was cracked, and it was only growing more obvious by the day. Sitting up in his bed with his blankets pooling around his legs, a knock at the door startled Wilbur out of staring at his empty palms. He rose to his feet, making sure he was presentable before hurrying to the door and pressing the button to open it. Jack Manifold stood on the other side. A flicker of surprise flashed over his face when he realized Tommy wasn't in the room with Wilbur, which made sense since Rambo had been the one to collect Tommy for training that morning. But the emotion was gone as soon as Wilbur noticed it, smoothed over by the icy air that all Zephyr's 4 soldiers seemed to cling to like a mask. "Is Theseus with Techno again?" Jack asked, glancing over Wilbur's shoulder and into the room. "Yup," Wilbur shrugged, fighting to keep his face impassive. "I had breakfast brought to the room, so we don't need to—" Nah, they told me you called breakfast up. That's not why I'm here," Jack told him, his coat swaying around his legs as he shifted his weight. "I only need you." Wilbur bit back a sigh. He had been hoping Jack wouldn't say that. "Let me guess. His Majesty summoned me?" Wilbur asked, not bothering to hide the annoyance in his words. "Look, man, I just do what I'm told," Jack said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. Yeah, I know. Don't shoot the messenger and shit," Wilbur muttered, turning back into the room to grab his coat from the closet. After tightening the coat's belt so the chill didn't seep under his shirt, Wilbur grabbed his glasses off the nightstand and left the room to follow Jack down the hallway. The walk was silent for the first few minutes. As always, Jack's back was held ramrod straight, and Wilbur noticed his head looked freshly shaved compared to the regrowth he'd seen crop up a few times before. Absently, Wilbur grabbed a strand of his own hair and tugged it down in front of his eyes. It was far longer than he usually let it get, and it was becoming a hassle to shove it out of his face. "Is there someone who does haircuts in the palace?" Wilbur asked. Jack stumbled over his own feet at the question, whipping his head around to frown at Wilbur. "Huh?" "Your head is shaved," Wilbur pointed out. "My hair's getting way too fucking long. Is there someone here who can cut it for me?" Yeah, I think so. I'll have to get it approved by Puffy, but I can work that out," Jack told him, eyes darting to his hair. What's it even like to have that much hair at one time? Gonna be annoying as shit to have that fully in your face all the time. Have you never had your hair long?" Wilbur asked, although the mental gymnastics of trying to imagine Jack Manifold with hair was very difficult. "It's certainly not as long as yours," Jack huffed. "It's much easier to deal with like this." Pushing his curls out of his eyes again, Wilbur nodded. "I'm sure it is." Jack raised an eyebrow. "I mean, if you want a quick fix, I got some clippers in my room I can grab. I could give you the Jack Manifold original." Wilbur blinked. No thanks. I'd rather not be bald." "Suit yourself." They resumed making their way down the hall, the chilly air of the palace biting at Wilbur's cheeks as he tugged his coat tighter around him. They passed the dining hall, with staff rushing about to clean up the dishes left over from breakfast. He glanced inside as they passed to see if anyone he knew was still in there, but it was empty. They turned down the hall towards the throne room. As the doors came into view, Wilbur prepared himself for the usual routine of Jack telling the guards why they were there so they could open the doors for them. But before they had even stopped walking, the doors slid open of their own accord. A man Wilbur had never seen before strolled out, a sharp grin exposing a shimmering gemstone he had in place of one of his teeth. Unlike the other leaders, the man wasn't wearing formal court attire, but he wasn't wearing a guard's uniform either. Instead, He wore dark trousers with golden birds embroidered into the fabric, glittering to an almost unnatural degree as they flew up the sides of his legs. Despite what the nice pants would suggest, he wore no coat, instead just donning a white button-down shirt that had the sleeves rolled up, exposing an array of shimmering tattoos that seemed to ripple along his skin like feathers. Who the fuck? The only person I can think of is Foolish. Or it could be like Mage Bomb or something, I don't know. Besides that, though, there was nothing that unusual about the man's appearance. Dark, straight hair nearly fell to his shoulders, and was pushed down by a knit cap similar to the one Amesy wore. Oh, is it Quackity? With this one shade being a shade of dark gray as opposed to Amesy's white. There was also a long scar trailing down the side of his face, passing through one of his eyes and tugging up the skin of his lip to expose his gemstone tooth. Wilbur had no desire to find out what kind of weapon could cause an injury like that. As soon as Wilbur met the man's eyes, he stopped walking, his grin growing even wider as he looked Wilbur up and down. Well, well, well. Rumors were true. Phil's taking in strays now, the man said, taking a step towards Wilbur. Up close now, Wilbur could see he towered over the man, and that he actually didn't seem to be that much older than Wilbur himself. In fact, they could even be the same age, but it was difficult to tell with the scar. And who are you supposed to be? Wilbur asked, raising an unimpressed eyebrow. Name's Quackity, he said, folding his arms over his chest. So no title then, Wilbur muttered, just loud enough for Quackity to hear the judgment lacing his tone. I'm Orpheus, Prince of Eldingvega, although I have a feeling you already knew that. Behind him, Wilbur could sense Jack stiffening, but he kept his face neutral as the man's grin grew. Oh, so he's got some bite to him, Quackity chuckled. Pretty bold for a bastard son, though I suppose you're used to getting away with a lot more since no one really pays attention to you, huh? The words were like a slap to the face. A shudder ran through him at that, but he did his best to suppress it. Still, judging by the way Quackity's eyes were darting over him, he hadn't missed the fact that his blow had landed. Don't let me keep you from your meeting, Your Highness, Quackity said, sarcasm dripping from his voice. I'm sure you two have a lot to talk about anyway. And with that, Quackity turned down the hall, footsteps growing fainter as the seconds ticked on. Wilbur watched him go, jaw clenched and hands curled into fists at his side. Who the fuck even was that guy? He didn't even have a title, yet he called Philza Phil. If he could get away with a transgression like that, it meant he had to be important in some way or another. Which also begged the question, why was Wilbur only seeing him now? The timing wasn't lost on him. The leaders had left only the day before, and now this new and completely unknown figure appears? There had to be some kind of connection there. A cough startled Wilbur out of his thoughts. Jack was giving him a pointed look, subtly gesturing for him to go into the throne room. Shit. He was supposed to talk to Philza. Taking a breath to try and cool his blood, Wilbur forced himself to uncurl his fists and shook his hands out at his sides. Then, he nodded at Jack, before stepping through the doors and into the throne room. In the past, anytime he entered the throne room, Philza had been sitting on the throne itself. His large wings would be spread out behind him, and his icy stare would look down on Wilbur, piercing straight through his skull to try and unspool all his thoughts. This time, though, Filza wasn't settled in the metal throne. Instead, he was standing by the windows on the left side of the room, staring out at the glittering city beyond. As the door slid shut behind him, Filza glanced away from the windows to meet Wilbur's eyes. For a moment, his training kicked in, and Wilbur had the urge to bow since he knew that was court etiquette for meeting the Emperor after having been summoned. But Wilbur figured they were long past etiquette at this point. If he didn't bow, what was Filza going to do? Threaten him? Like he hadn't done that dozens of times already. They had dropped the pretenses of respect quite a while ago. Good morning, Orpheus, Filza greeted, dipping his head at Wilbur. No title, just Orpheus. Again, all pretenses of respect had disappeared. Morning, Filza, Wilbur replied, keeping his shoulders straight and head held high. There was a beat as Filza raised his eyebrows in surprise. Wilbur's heart pounded in his chest as the icy gaze darted over him. He could practically hear the gears turning in Filza's head. Then, he huffed, a slight smile flickering over his face. He turned back to the window, his feathers rustling as he stretched out his wings and his arms, gesturing for Wilbur to come closer. For a moment, Wilbur debated not responding. Wait, is another ad running? Oh, I don't know. Hold on, 1 second. For a moment, Wilbur debated not responding, keeping his feet firmly planted in the stone out of pure pettiness. But that was too childish even for him. So he swallowed his annoyance and walked over to the window, making sure to keep a few feet between him and Filza. The city was as stunning as always. Metal and concrete towers glittered in the pale blue light reflecting off the ice cavern walls. Lights flashed here and there as trains ran between floating railways, and there were blurred shapes and colors along the ground from moving crowds of people. It was so far away, yet so close at the same time. Hi, Shy. I don't know if an ad's running right now, because I don't have the option to run 1 minute ads, and my mic is very quiet. I thought I fixed it. Okay, let me, whoop, there we go. How's that? Everything good? I swear, it was when, like, the fucking OBS updated that everything was like, I'm still quiet? Bro. What the fuck? Okay. What if I do this? Whoop, there we go. Is it just because, like, I'm speaking quietly? It could also be just because I'm speaking quietly. Is that, I turned it up a bit more. Is that any better? Maybe I should turn down this. try and balance that out a little bit. I'm not good with with balancing audio and shit. Okay, I'm gonna keep going, and if it's still really quiet, let me know. Let's see, where was I? Sometimes, Wilbur wondered what life outside the palace walls on Zephyr's 4 was like. Were the people here happy? Were they proud to live in the capital of one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy? Or was it just an aspect of their lives they had long since grown used to? Wilbur didn't have the slightest idea. But judging by the pride that had practically lit up Phil's face as he stared out of the city, he would be surprised if there was any discontent in the city at all. Despite all his intricacies, the one thing Wilbur felt he could read on Phil's face was that he loved Zephyr's 4. Have I heard of... I'm not answering that. This place wasn't just the seat of his power, it was his home. I'll get straight to the point. I called you in here to let you know that we're not gonna jump straight back into negotiations right away, Philza told him. Also, the stream looks like the battle pass. Okay, sure. Also, a heads up, I do voices as part of my immersion when reading. If it's cringe, fuck off, I don't care. I said in the beginning of stream that would be my one and only warning, but I guess I'm doing it again. Hold on, what's that emote? Oh. That's a cute emote. Philza told him, keeping his eyes fixed on the city. Wait, what? Why not? Wilbur asked, ignoring the relief that swelled in his chest at that. The summit took up quite a bit of my time, Philza explained, fiddling with the ends of his cloak. I've been ignoring some of my duties to Zephyr's 4. Techno and I need some time to catch up on our work. Not to mention, I'm trying to get in contact with Themis to see what they make of your predicament, so I want to have some word with them before we continue on with anything. Wilbur blinked. Wait, you're trying to contact Themis? Yes, but it's been difficult, Philza said, and Wilbur almost had the urge to laugh. He would be shocked if Philza actually managed to get an audience with anyone from Themis, given how closed off they were to most of the galaxy. How long will things be delayed for? Wilbur pushed. Hold on, I dropped my pencil. Where'd it go? Where's my pencil? What? 1 second. There you are. Let's see. Philza shrugged. I'm not sure. Hopefully not too long. But you never know with these things. His wording was vague, but the faint smile on his face was not. Wilbur narrowed his eyes. Bullshit. You're just putting it off because you know we can't do anything about it. You want to make us wait. Maybe a few weeks ago, Wilbur wouldn't have had the courage to speak so bluntly to Phil's face like that. But his patience was a little more than a frayed thread, and the self-control he once had was something closer to a distant memory than a facet of the person he'd become over his time on Zephyr's 4. At this point, Wilbur knew Philza didn't care about slights like that. This was quickly proved right when Philza laughed at Wilbur's tone. That's not my main motivation, That's not my main motivation. I do actually have work to attend to. But I won't lie and say that's not a factor. Philza told him, letting his smile become more visible. Now drink water? That actually, thank you. I needed to do a drink break at some point anyway. Let's see, where was I? After all, it's not like you and Theseus have much else to do these days. Unless you two count arguing as part of your schedule. Wilbur wheeled back as if he'd been slapped. That had to be another power play. There was no way Philza could know they'd been arguing. Sure, they might be acting a bit colder towards each other during meals, but the only explicit arguments they had happened in the privacy of their room. I don't know what you're talking about, Wilbur immediately said. Theseus and I haven't been arguing. Philza snorted. You really aren't as good at hiding your emotions as you think you are, mate. Techno sees Theseus nearly every day at this point, and it's not hard to pick up on the fact that he doesn't take kindly to you being brought up as a topic of conversation. Wilbur narrowed his eyes. He talks to the Imperator about me? Don't get your feathers ruffled, little bird. Theseus isn't the one bringing you up. Techno is. Well, there were several things in that sentence that bothered him. One of them being the fact that Philza called him Little Bird, but that was secondary to what he said about Technoblade. Why does he bring me up? He just wants to get an idea of how you're doing. You stopped attending the training sessions, but that doesn't mean he's completely disinterested in you. Pausing then, Philza rolled his shoulders, his wings shuffling with a gesture. In the same vein, I'm not completely disinterested in Theseus either, but I find it easier to talk with you, while Techno finds it easier to talk with your brother. I don't know if easy is the word I would use to describe our conversations. Wilbur scoffed. Philza laughed again. That's a fair point. Talking to you isn't easy by any means, but it certainly is entertaining. Clenching his jaw, Wilbur kept his eyes fixed on the window. I think we have wildly different interpretations of our interactions. What? You don't enjoy our little chats? Philza asked. Oh no, please don't tell me that's my roommate. See, my room is at the very end of the hallway, and barely anybody comes down here for that reason. So if I hear anybody in the hallway, I always assume that it's my roommate. Hold on, one second. Because I forgot to tell them that I'm live again. Fucking hell. Sorry, yawn. Let's see, where was I? Philza asked, tone half mocking as he raised an eyebrow at Wilbur. No, I don't. Oh, Jesus Christ, please no. Okay, I think we're good. Instead of getting upset at his words, Philza's grin turned, knowing. I know that's not true. I'm well aware you don't like me, but I also know that deep down, there's a part of you that likes this challenge. Your words are your weapon, and you enjoy getting a chance to use your tongue as a dagger. But Wilbur's tongue wasn't a dagger. Not anymore. Honestly, it might not ever have been. His skills in wordplay had been crumbling more and more by the day, as his emotions overrode his logic and he made slip-up after slip-up. "Stop acting like you know me," Wilbur hissed, folding his arms over his chest. "But I do know you, Orpheus," Philza insisted. "Like I told you, you're a lot like I was when I was younger." "And I don't believe that for one fucking second," Wilbur snapped, whipping his head towards Philza. "I'm not a fool. I know you're trying to get inside my head. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. Either way, I told you that and I'm honest in my intentions. I'm not lying about that." Wilbur wasn't sure whether to believe him or not, because whether he was lying or being truthful, either option had troubling implications. If Philza was lying, then Wilbur knew he was trying to manipulate him to worm his way into his mind. But if Philza was being truthful, and Wilbur really did remind him of himself, then, well, Wilbur didn't want to think about what that implied for the type of person he was, for the kind of man he might turn out to be. Silence fell between them. It hung in the air, thick and choking in a way that was both satisfying and horrible to try and push back against. Wilbur wanted things between him and Philza to be tense, but at the same time, his silence felt like he was handing Philza another victory, another pawn lost to the Emperor's rook. And in true Victor fashion, Philza was the one to break the silence again. "You do surprise me sometimes, though," Philza began, turning back to the window, "like with Schlatt. Really didn't think you two would find any sort of common ground, and yet your guard told me he summoned you to his room for a drink." Shit. Of course Philza knew about that. "Schlatt and I didn't get along. It was one drink, and he just summoned me there to try and convince me to give up and join the Empire," Wilbur told him. Philza snorted. "I'm not blind, Orpheus. You were hung over as fuck when the leaders left. You didn't ask the servants to bring any liquor to your room, and I doubt you went off to get plastered with Carl and Tina." Curling his hands into a fist, Wilbur took a measured breath through his nose. "Fine. We shared a drink twice. Doesn't mean I don't think he's a drunken idiot." Philza raised an eyebrow in obvious doubt at this, but before he could open his mouth, Wilbur spoke again. "Schlatt's gone now anyway, so it doesn't matter. Frankly, I'm more focused on that quackity guy who I just ran into outside the throne room." Now that seemed to take Philza off guard. He blinked, the smile falling from his face for a moment. "He spoke with you?" was the first thing Philza asked. "We exchanged a few words." Another beat passed. Then Philza sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. Of course he couldn't keep his mouth shut. Philza muttered, shaking his head. "What did he say to you?" Wilbur huffed. "Insulted me?" Yeah, that sounds like him." Philza snorted. He dropped his hand from his face and lifted his head to meet Wilbur's eyes again. "Try not to mind him. He's a business associate of mine. He'll be spending some time around the palace for the next few weeks." "Is he from Zephyr's 4, or is he affiliated with another planet?" Wilbur asked. "Neither. I don't know what planet he's from, but I don't think he's been there in quite some time. Our business isn't related to those kinds of topics," Philza explained to him. "It's nothing related to Eldingfigure either, so don't concern yourself with it." Don't concern yourself with it. Well, that immediately made Wilbur want to concern himself with it. "What's his area of work?" Wilbur pushed. "Transport," Philza said. His tone clipped. Then, Before Wilbur could try and ask for more information, he was whirling around and walking back to his throne. Now, I hate to cut things short, but I have work I need to attend to, so you're dismissed. Wilbur blinked at the abrupt change of pace in the conversation. While a part of him wanted to keep pushing it, he could tell that Philza wasn't going to give him anything more than what he'd already said. Clearly, he didn't think Wilbur needed to know why Quackity was in the palace. Of course, this just meant that Wilbur was going to try his best to find out. But Philza didn't need to know that. Instead of bothering to say a farewell, Wilbur simply turned on his heel and left the throne room, ignoring the weight of Philza's eyes on his back the entire way out. The entire walk back to his room, Wilbur couldn't stop thinking about his conversation with the Emperor. As always, he felt like he was left with so much to unpack from Philza's words. Of course, the entire mystery surrounding Quackity was at the forefront of his mind. But there was also the fact that he knew about Wilbur and Schlatt's shared drinks, or that Technoblade was apparently asking Tommy about him. And then the most troubling thing he learned from that conversation. Philza and Technoblade knew he and Tommy were arguing. They couldn't afford that kind of weakness. Couldn't let either of them know they were getting to the brothers. It would tell them to put more pressure on them, but they were both so close to breaking already. Any more pressure and they would be crushed. Shit. This was really bad. Drink break. Because he was lost in thought while he walked, Wilbur hurried around a corner to follow Jack, and didn't notice Rambu heading his way until they nearly collided. Oh, shit! Wilbur yelped as he sidestepped out of the way, narrowly missing Rambu. Sorry, Rambu. I didn't see you there. Rambu, who had stumbled over his own feet trying not to walk straight into Wilbur, shook his head. Oh no, I'm sorry. That was my fault. I should have looked where I was going. He straightened up, readjusting the poofy sleeves of his blouse, before looking back at Wilbur. Are you okay? I'm fine, don't worry, Wilbur said, waving the concern off. That's good. Yeah, that's good. Rambu stammered, eyes darting quickly over Wilbur's face before falling back to the ground. There was an awkward pause. Wilbur knew he should keep walking, say his goodbyes to Rambu and hurry back to his room, but he could still hear Tommy's words from a few days earlier echoing in his mind. He's actually a genuinely good person. You'd know that if you stopped treating him like he's the enemy. Tommy trusted Rambu. Wilbur did not. And while Wilbur wanted to hold on to that paranoia, to listen to his gut and keep all his secrets locked inside, Tommy had a point. He hadn't really had a proper conversation with Rambu before. Not one-on-one. He didn't trust Rambu and wasn't going to start. But maybe he should try to just talk to him. See what he was like. At the very least, it could give him an idea of how he got so close to Tommy so quickly. Have you seen Tommy today? Wilbur asked, wincing at how obviously uncomfortable he sounded. Rambu blinked. No, not today. I think he's with Techno, though, if you're looking for him. No, that's fine, Wilbur said, shaking his head. I figured he was. I was just curious if he was back from training yet. He might be, I'm not sure. I've just been busy doing other stuff, so, haven't gotten a chance to chat with him. Rambu shifted from foot to foot, obviously unsure of where the conversation was going. Are you doing okay? Me? Yeah, you, Your Highness. Wilbur couldn't help but grimace at the title. Compared to him calling Tommy by his personal name, it made Wilbur seem a bit like a dick in comparison. While he didn't know Rambu well enough to allow him to use his personal name, he could grant one thing. You can just say Orpheus. If it's not in a formal setting, I don't mind if you don't use my title, Wilbur told him, swallowing down the lump in his throat. Anyway, I'm alright. You know how it is. There was a moment where Rambu seemed to be in shock over Wilbur giving him permission to not use his title. But after a few seconds, he shook himself out of it. Are you sure? Because I know things weren't great the other day. Right. Because Tommy had told Rambu all about their argument. It's fine, Wilbur told him, even though things with Tommy were certainly not fine. We're working stuff out. Rambu's eyes widened in surprise. Wait, really? Have you guys come to a compromise on things? Wilbur was acutely aware of Jack Manifold standing only a few feet away. Even though he was against the wall and not outright eavesdropping, he could still hear everything he and Rambu were saying, which meant that even if he could trust Rambu, he wouldn't be talking about something like this out in the middle of the hallway. The thought made annoyance flash through him. Rambu was really oblivious to the concept of secrecy, wasn't he? You could say that, Wilbur said, side-eyeing Jack. It's nothing to worry about, Rambu. Shit like that happens with siblings, you know? Rambu's gaze followed Wilbur's side-eye, and he let out a soft breath of realization, as if he was only just now noticing Jack standing nearby. He was silent for a moment, eyes darting between Jack and Wilbur, before he ducked down towards Wilbur's ear. Tommy really doesn't like you two not being on the same side of this, Rambu whispered. I know he might seem mad, but it's also stressing him out a lot. For a moment, Wilbur wanted to snap back at Rambu that he knew that already. That Tommy was his brother, and he could damn well tell that he hated disagreeing with Wilbur on something as important as this. Sure, they didn't have the same opinion on everything, but when it came to politics, Tommy had always trusted Wilbur's point of view. That didn't mean he would always blindly follow his advice. He was never afraid to question why Wilbur said the things he said. But he recognized that Wilbur had studied more on these kinds of things than he did. Not to mention, most of their viewpoints aligned anyway, so it wasn't like it was ever an issue for them not to agree on political matters. Wilbur was well aware that it took a lot for Tommy to tell Wilbur that he thought they should join the Empire. That was something that Wilbur couldn't brush aside. It was a sign that they were breaking Tommy, wearing him down little by little. Wilbur had to stand strong against it, had to keep his tower from crumbling, or else Tommy would drown right beside him. But it was so hard to keep himself upright, let alone keep Tommy's head above water as well. He wanted to tell Rambu that he knew all this, that he knew Tommy better than Rambu ever would, that Rambu had no right to talk to him like he couldn't read his own brother. But he was trying to listen, right? And maybe Rambu didn't mean it in a condescending way. Maybe he was just genuinely worried about Tommy and wanted to offer what information he could to help Wilbur fix him. Wilbur didn't believe that for a second, but it was what he told himself over and over again as he forced down the bitterness rising up his throat, nodding at Rambu instead. I know, Wilbur said, keeping his voice low. Trust me, Rambu, I know. Rambu stared at him for a moment, eyebrows furrowed and mouth opening and closing as if he was unsure of what to say next. After a moment, his face softened into something almost pained and whispered, Then why do you keep doing? Who the fuck is running down the hall? What the fuck? One second, I need to... I am so confused right now. Oh dear me. Anyway, I don't know if y'all heard that, but I definitely did. Anyway, where was I? Then why do you keep doing this to him? And that's not what Wilbur expected him to ask. He almost stumbled back in surprise at the question. Why was he doing this? Did he really phrase it like Wilbur had a choice in the matter? I'm doing what I can to protect him, Wilbur hissed, his pretenses of politeness burning away. I'm protecting our planet, our home, and our home. But isn't it technically Tommy's planet, since he's the heir? Rambu asked quietly. Shouldn't he be the one making the decisions about what happens to it? It was the first time Wilbur had heard a question like that said in a completely sincere way. There was no mocking in his tone. This wasn't a cruel jab at Wilbur's illegitimate status. Rambu was genuinely asking him this. That didn't mean the words didn't slide through his ribs like a knife. Tommy is 15 years old, Wilbur reminded him, the bite in his words fading as an ache grew in his chest. He's a child. He doesn't have the skill set yet to make these kinds of decisions. And you do? Rambu questioned. I might not be an expert, but I have several more years' worth of studying on this than my brother does, so I'd say that gives me at least some level of accreditation, Wilbur said, his whispered voice cracking. I'm trying to do what I think is best here, and while Tommy might not like it, I'm going to try, and I'm going to keep trying until I can't anymore. Whether you think I'm right or wrong for doing this really isn't any of your business, Rambu. At this, oh fuck, I forgot that this video has like a little bit of silence for some reason. There we go. At this, Rambu curled in on himself like he was trying to hide from Wilbur's piercing glare. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to come off like I was attacking you. Well, you did a pretty shit job of it, Wilbur huffed, although his anger was fading as he took in the kicked puppy look taking center stage on Rambu's face. I'm sorry, Rambu apologized again. That came out really wrong. I know you're just trying to do what you know. And now Wilbur saw he had a choice. He could make another sharp comment at Rambu. Could storm off and leave the boy shaking like a leaf, curled in on himself like he was waiting to be scolded. Why does this part of the video, feel a lot louder? I'm turning it down. There we go. Wilbur didn't feel bad for Rambu. He didn't have to push his way into business that wasn't his own. He had no right to try and pass judgment on Wilbur for his choices in this situation. But at the same time, if Tommy was right and Rambu really was a genuine person at heart, This could be him trying to be a good friend. He knew that Tommy was upset over Wilbur's refusal to compromise, and he had made it clear he didn't want Tommy to be upset. Maybe he thought that hearing it from Rambu might make Wilbur more willing to listen, even if he was dead wrong about that. His paranoia was twisting his thoughts into dark clouds he could barely even recognize as his own. Every minute expression, every half sentence, every stutter was something his mind would catalog as evidence against the person. Could he really not trust Rambu? Or was his suspicion just getting the better of him? Tommy cared about him for a reason. Did Wilbur trust his own sense of judgment more than Tommy's? Did Wilbur even trust himself anymore? He had no answer to that. The foundations under his pillar cracked a little bit more. I should get going back to my room, Wilbur muttered, the anger having drained out of him as quickly as it had arrived. See you later, Rambu. His voice was flat, dejected. It was a stranger's voice coming out of his own mouth. Oh, okay then. Are you okay? What a stupid question. Wilbur didn't respond as he turned back down the hallway, Jack having to hurry to keep up the pace with him. He listened for footsteps behind them, to try and see if Rambu was going to follow him and give him more of a headache than he already had. There was nothing. Wilbur told himself it was a relief. Once he got back to his room, Wilbur saw that Tommy still wasn't back from training yet. He sat down on the edge of the bed, pulling off his shoes before bringing his knees up to his chest and resting his chin on top of them. The weight on his shoulders was crushing him. Every breath was a struggle. Every decision he had to make was another crack in the stone. If his foundation crumbled all the way, if the waves battered at him over and over until he broke apart into a dozen pieces, if his pillar sunk to the bottom of the ocean where no light could reach it, would the inscription at the base of the pillar read, Ozymandias? Wait, no, it wouldn't. Ozymandias had a kingdom once. Even if they didn't exist anymore, at one point in life, at one point in time, Ozymandias had something to his name. Wilbur had nothing. The inscription at the base of his pillar would be blank. That night at dinner, Wilbur was picking at his food, and Tommy was chatting excitedly to Amesy and Rambu. Tommy hadn't finished his training session with Technoblade until right before dinner was set to start. He was covered in sweat, and only exchanged a few words with Wilbur before he was rushing into the bathroom to take a fast shower. Wilbur, who had been curled around his pillow on the bed and staring at the wall, didn't even look up. Now they were at dinner. Tommy was telling Amesy and Rambu about all the cool new moves Technoblade had taught him, because apparently Technoblade had decided to teach Tommy how to throw knives today. Wilbur listened, wanting to know how things were going between him and Technoblade, but he wasn't offering any commentary of his own. It was as if all the energy had been sucked out of him. The effort it took to lift his fork to his mouth alone was enough to make him want to curl up in his bed and never climb out. But thankfully, Tommy didn't seem to notice. It was so fucking cool, guys. I was just staring at this target that was so far away, and I totally didn't think I was gonna hit it. But Technoblade showed me how to hold the knife properly, adjusted my arm a bit, and when I threw it, it landed right in the center. Holy shit, that's so cool! Amesy exclaimed. That's really awesome, Tommy. It took me so long to get the hang of throwing knives, and even then I'm still not very good at it, Rambu told him, his hands folding on the table in front of him. Oh, Rambo, we gotta have a competition sometime, so you can get the most. Seems we meet again. Tommy was cut off by a new voice appearing behind them, and Wilbur had to fight the urge to groan as he shifted around in his seat to face the newcomer. Quackity was standing behind both his and Tommy's chairs, arms folded over his chest and gemstone tooth shimmering like a prism as the lights above reflected off of it. Wilbur clenched his jaw when he met Quackity's eyes, remembering what Phil had said about him earlier that day. The mystery that surrounded his reason for being here. I would say it's a pleasure to see you again, but it's not, Wilbur said, meeting Quackity's gaze coolly. Beside him, Tommy choked. Wilbur, what the fuck? Who is this guy? Before Wilbur could explain his run-in with Quackity earlier that day, Quackity was holding out a hand for Tommy to shake, tattoos rippling over his skin with the movement. Name's Quackity. I work with Phil sometimes, he explained, flashing Tommy a sharp grin. Prince Orpheus and I met earlier today. Tommy frowned, glancing between Wilbur and Quackity for a moment, no doubt taking notice of the sour expression that had crossed Wilbur's face. After a beat of hesitation, he reached out to take Quackity's hand, and shook it quickly before pulling away. You can call me Theseus, Tommy introduced, still looking confused. Is there, shit going on between you two or something? Again, before Wilbur could say anything, Quackity jumped in to explain. Yeah, that's actually what I came over here to talk about. Prince Orpheus, I wanted to apologize for getting off on the wrong foot, Quackity said, turning to face Wilbur. Definitely sounded like more of a dick than I meant to when we met earlier. Wilbur raised a doubtful eyebrow at that. Are you telling me that calling us strays wasn't supposed to be an insult? Quackity chuckled. Oh, it was. But I just realized that was kind of an asshole move on my end to have that be the first thing I say to you. Yeah, no shit, Wilbur muttered. I'm just saying. I don't want there to be any bad blood between us, since I'm gonna be hanging around here for the next few weeks, Quackity said, shoving his hands in his pockets. That was bullshit. It had to be. Either someone had told Quackity that Wilbur was the one acting as Tommy's advisor, so he wanted to be on Wilbur's good side so he could influence possible business decisions regarding Blazophane, or there was some even more sinister ulterior motive to the apology. No matter what, though, Wilbur had put enough pieces together to figure out that Quackity was a businessman. He wasn't blind to the fact that Tommy was sitting at the head of the wealthiest planet in the galaxy. There was blood in the water, and Quackity was sniffing it out. Quackity, do me a favor and stay away from me and my brother, Wilbur said, his words sharp enough to cut through stone. Quackity's eyebrows shot up in surprise, while Tommy frowned. Will, come on, chill the fuck out, Tommy said, straightening up in his seat. Tommy, don't. Something in Wilbur's voice must have made Tommy decide to stop arguing, because he snapped his mouth shut and scowled at him before he turned back to his food. Quackity, meanwhile, was grinning as if nothing had gone wrong. Don't worry, Your Highness. I'm not looking to start shit, Quackity told him, holding his hands up in mock surrender. Well, it's too late for that, so can you please let us finish our meal in peace? Wilbur asked, staring Quackity down. They locked eyes, and a beat of silence passed between them. Wilbur could see a range of emotions swirling through Quackity's dark gaze. Amusement, curiosity, and annoyance all rolled into one. Wilbur was almost satisfied when frustration was added to the mix. Alright then. Don't need to be told twice. See you guys around, Quackity said, taking a step back and waving to both of them before he turned on his heel and left the dining hall. Wilbur watched him go, noticing the way the birds embroidered along his pants seemed to almost move with every shift in the fabric. The thread glittered in such a way that it created the illusion of flapping wings as the light hit different parts of it. And Wilbur had to admit, that was some very fine craftsmanship. As soon as he was gone, Wilbur turned back to his plate, thinking of how utterly unappetizing his meal was after seeing Quackity. Okay, who the fuck was that? Was the first thing Tommy asked as soon as Wilbur tuned back into the conversation. That's Quackity. He's a business associate of Phil's and Techno's. That was Wilbur. That was Robbie that was saying that. That's Quackity. He's a business associate of Phil's and Techno's, Rambu told him, wringing his hands together. Techno, doesn't really like him all that much, and he doesn't like Techno either. But he's been working with them both for a while now, so I guess they get along on some things. I've never seen him around here before. Amesy pointed out, dark brows scrunched together. Yeah, he doesn't come by too often. Sometimes he's only here for a day, other times he'll stay for months. It's pretty random, Rabu explained. What's he here for, though? Tommy asked, glancing back at the archway leading out of the dining hall. Like, what kind of business stuff does he even do? To Wilbur's disappointment, Rambu shrugged at this. I'm not sure, honestly. Techno hasn't told me much, and Phil doesn't really go into detail either. That's fucking weird, Tommy muttered, slumping back in his seat. Yeah, he's interesting for sure, Rambu said quietly, picking up his fork again. And that was the end of that conversation. After that, Tommy resumed talking about his knife throwing, while Wilbur stewed over his food in silence. Not even Rambu seemed to know what the deal with Quackity was. Or if he did, he wasn't allowed to say what was going on behind the scenes. Once again, that raised far more questions than it answered, and Wilbur knew this was going to drive him mad sooner or later. Once they finished their meal, the walk back to their room was silent. Wilbur had barely gotten the chance to talk to Tommy all day, and the quiet pressed down on every side of him, making it difficult to breathe once again. After bidding goodbye to Jack, the door to their room slid shut behind them, and the pressure only got more intense. So what the fuck was up with you and Quackity? Tommy asked as soon as they were alone. And Wilbur knew he should explain all of his suspicions. He knew he should lay out everything Quackity said to him, and everything Philza told him, and his suspicions about the timing of Quackity's arrival. But he was so tired. So unbelievably tired of everything. Every day it was something new. Every day the pressure got worse. Every day more broken pieces of himself fell into an unforgiving sea, never to be seen again. What do you care? Wilbur asked, not looking at Tommy as he shrugged his coat off and sat on the edge of the bed. Tommy blinked. What do you mean, what do I care? I want to know why you were telling him to leave us alone. Would you even believe me if I explained my thoughts? Wilbur asked, giving Tommy a tired look. Or would you just say I'm being paranoid again? Realization washed over Tommy, his bright eyes going wide as his face softened. Will, come on, don't be like that. I want to know what's going on. This was childish and Wilbur knew it, but he was too tired to be anything but. I just don't see the fucking point if you're going to dismiss everything I say, Wilbur snapped, wrapping his arms around himself. If you want to know, I don't trust Quackity. I have my reasons, but you're just going to remind me I don't trust anyone. That's unfair. Yes, I think you're overly paranoid about some things, but that doesn't mean I don't want to hear what you think. Tommy tried to argue. Wilbur scoffed, stretching out on the bed and turning his back to Tommy. Yeah, well, I don't want to hear what I have to say. I don't want to hear what I have to say. So how's that? Maybe that's supposed to say, I don't want to hear what you have to say, but I don't know. Oh, no, it is supposed to be I. Okay. The truth was bitter on his lips as it spilled out into the air. Wilbur didn't want to hear his own thoughts out loud, because it would only confirm what was already lurking in his mind. His thoughts were illogical. His paranoia was unfounded. His reasoning wasn't sound. Silence weighed heavily between them, crackling against Wilbur's skin like electricity. There were a few beats where Tommy didn't do anything, and then the lights were being turned off, and there was the sound of shuffling as Tommy changed into his pajamas. Then, the bed dipped as Tommy crawled in next to him, and Wilbur expected the silence to continue. Instead, there was a warm hand grabbing his shoulder, trying to turn him over. Wilbur resisted at first, but after a few seconds, he sighed and let Tommy roll him onto his other side so they were facing each other. Something's wrong, was the first thing Tommy said as soon as they were eye to eye. Wilbur huffed. Yeah, no shit, something's wrong. There's a lot fucking wrong right now. No, I mean there's something wrong with you, Tommy specified, his eyes boring into Wilbur's. You're not acting like yourself. You haven't been for a while now. That tends to happen when you're put into a life or death situation, Wilbur pointed out. I know I've been a dick lately, but I'm more than a little stressed out right now, so maybe lay the fuck off. Tommy's eyes narrowed. Yeah, no shit you're stressed, but I'm stressed too and you don't see me acting like a complete asshole. I get it. I'm a terrible damn person. Can I go the fuck to sleep now? Wilbur asked, his patience wearing thin. No, you can't. I'm trying to help you, but you're not letting me in. It's really starting to piss me off. I don't need your help, Wilbur hissed. There was a beat of silence as Tommy stared at him, glowing freckles casting spotted light on the sheets beneath his head. Then, he was reaching forward, and Wilbur shuddered when Tommy rested a hand on his cheek. Please, I'm right here, Will. Fucking talk to me, Tommy pleaded. And Wilbur was tempted. He was so tempted. The hand on his cheek was warm, soothing something aching inside of him that he hadn't even known was there. Tommy's whisper echoed around the room, wrapping Wilbur up in reassurances he didn't deserve, telling him that he could spill out all his terrible, jagged thoughts and anxieties and his brother would listen, that he would be there to help Wilbur put the pieces of himself back together. But that was a burden that was far too heavy for anyone to carry. No one deserved to have that job thrust on them, least of all Tommy. Tears burned in Wilbur's eyes as he moved Tommy's hand off his face and rolled over so he was facing away from his little brother. Behind him, he heard a soft sigh, following by more shuffling as Tommy turned his back to him as well. Good, He needed to stop caring. The ache in Wilbur's chest was blinding. His cheek burned where Tommy had touched it. When was the last time he'd hugged his little brother? He couldn't even remember at this point. Despite his exhaustion, Wilbur was once again plagued with his familiar foe of insomnia. He stared at the wall, anxiety buzzing through him as nausea crept up the back of his throat. Behind him, Tommy's breathing slowed, and it wasn't long before he could tell that Tommy had fallen asleep. If Tommy woke up and Wilbur was gone again, he would be more than upset. One wrong step could shatter the entire bridge between them, and Wilbur knew he needed to be careful not to destroy the little they had left. Wilbur knew this. He knew this as a fact, but he couldn't bring himself to care as he climbed out of bed anyway. Everything inside of him was numb as he padded towards the door. He glanced back at Tommy, the ache returning when he saw the glowing freckles illuminating his peaceful sleeping face. Then, he opened the door to the room and left without a sound. Wilbur wasn't sure where he was going this time. He wandered the corridors, cold seeping from the stone floor and through his socks, making a shudder run down his spine. Through the windows that lined some of the palace halls, Wilbur could see the ice above their heads lit up in soft shades of blue and white. The city was still abuzz with life, and Wilbur pressed a hand to the chilly glass, wondering what their lives were like out there. They didn't have to make decisions that affected entire planets. One wrong step for one of them only meant a mistake was made. One wrong step for someone like Wilbur could send the entire galaxy toppling over. I'm beginning to think you have some kind of chronic insomnia problem, mate. The familiar voice should have made dread curl around Wilbur's gut. It should have settled over his shoulders like an unwelcome weight and made him shudder with fear. It should have been something he didn't want to hear. Wilbur couldn't bring himself to care, though, as Phil's shoulder brushed his own. I'm not really in the mood for any more vague threats or whatever the fuck you want to say to me tonight, Wilbur said, keeping his gaze fixed on the city. Philza hummed, unbothered by his harsh tone. That's understandable. You definitely seem more exhausted than usual. I'm sure you're happy about that, Wilbur muttered, bitterness dripping from his words. If I'm tired, I fuck up more. If I fuck up, you have a better chance of getting what you want. Nah, I think that makes the whole game a bit less fun, Philza told him, wings brushing against Wilbur's back. Wilbur was silent. He wasn't sure if he believed Philza or not. You haven't left the palace since you arrived here, have you? Philza then asked. Wilbur blinked, not having expected a question like that. No, obviously I haven't. There was a beat as Philza considered this, tapping his talons along the arms folded over his chest. Would you like to see something cool? Turning to face Philza, Wilbur frowned at him. Am I going to say yes and then you're going to take me to an executioner's block or some shit? A startled laugh erupted from Philza, and he tilted his head back as the sound echoed down the palace walls. No, it's nothing like that. Trust me, if I wanted to execute you, I wouldn't need to trick you about it. Well, that was strangely reassuring. Fine, lead the way, Wilbur relented, figuring there is no point in saying no. Flashing him a grin, Philza turned on his heel and headed down the hallway. Wilbur followed, their footsteps bouncing off the walls and making it sound like there were more than two of them walking. He suppressed his shudders, though, and let Philza lead him down the twists and turns. And it didn't take long for Wilbur to realize where Philza was taking him. "Why are you taking me to the train platform?" he asked, not having been there since he and Tommy first arrived at the palace. "Call it a field trip," Philza shrugged, still smiling as he picked up the pace. A few minutes later, they arrived on the platform. Unlike before when it had been buzzing with people, now it was almost completely empty. There was a single train car sitting on the tracks. All the lights shut off with a guard standing near the doors. When she spotted Philza and Wilbur, she immediately straightened up like she'd been shocked, and bowed stiffly at both of them in greeting. Let's see. "Your Majesty, you're here for the train?" she asked, her uniform shimmering in the dim lights of the platform. "Yes, I am. We're going to K4, he told her. She blinked in surprise, but nodded quickly as she pressed a button to open the doors of the train. The guard stepped inside and Philza followed, gesturing for Wilbur to come as well. Maybe Wilbur should have hesitated. Maybe he shouldn't have been so cavalier about leaving the palace he'd been staying in for over a month now without Tommy by his side. Maybe Wilbur shouldn't have agreed to go with Philza in the first place. But Wilbur's thoughts were hazy with exhaustion, his logic dulled by the endless cycle of anxiety and anger that was every waking moment on Zephyr's 4. So he didn't think twice as he stepped through the train doors, and he also didn't hesitate to settle down next to Philza on the narrow seats. The guard nodded at them once before she was hurrying up to the front of the small train car. She typed a few things into a holo panel, and then train jolted, lights flickering on as it began to move down the track. They pulled away from the palace platform and back onto that grand track that overlooked the entire city. Even though he had long since grown used to the view from inside the walls of the palace, it was still something else to behold on the train itself. Wilbur pressed his hand against the window, staring in awe at the glittering metal spires. Beside him, he heard Philza quietly chuckle, but chose to ignore it in favor of watching the train pass over the city. Soon, the train switched tracks and began to descend onto a lower level. The city buildings were closer now, and Wilbur could make out mostly empty streets. There were a few people here and there walking between the towering buildings, but at this time of night they were few and far between. Softly glowing lights were strung up between the different buildings, with a few orbs floating on their own, and it gave the entire city a surprisingly warm atmosphere for how cold and intimidating the architecture was. Then, the buildings began to spread out. Looking forward, Wilbur saw they were heading straight into one of the tunnels that ran into the wall of the ice cavern. And up close, Wilbur could see the ice wall that was made up of thousands of rigid lines stacked on top of each other. A sign that it was a natural cave formation, then? The city disappeared behind them as they rode into the tunnel. Things were dark for a few moments, before the tunnel quickly opened up again into another cavern. This one was much smaller than the main cavern, but it was still bigger than what Wilbur was expecting, and he saw there were even more tunnels branching off as the train rails ran down each one. The train made a sharp turn down one of the smaller tunnels. It was only another few seconds of darkness before it opened up to a single cave, with the railway hitting a dead end in the center of it. The car came to a complete stop right before it hit the end of the track. Philza stood up, the tip of his wing smacking Wilbur in the face where he was still sitting down. The doors hissed as they slid open, and the guard nodded at Filza before stepping out first. After a few moments, she gave a thumbs up, and Filza gestured for Wilbur to get out of his seat. The second they stepped out of the train car, Wilbur was practically blasted in the face with icy air. He shivered, wrapping his arms around himself and cursing the fact that he was wearing nothing but thin pajamas. But then he took a few more steps away from the car, and quickly forgot about the cold as he took in the cave they had rode into. It was small, much smaller than the earlier caverns they had passed through. This one was probably only a bit larger than the dining hall, with walls of ice curving up over their heads and interspersed with pieces of sheet metal drilled into it. The ice itself was made up of rather stunning blue and white swirls, the colors twisting together in a way that was completely indescribable, but beautiful all the same. The guard stayed by the train car as Filza led him deeper into the cave. There were a few floating lights keeping the place from being completely dark, but it was hard to see the further away from the train car they got. Along with the sheet metal, there was also stone embedded into the ice. Walls of craggy gray stone that had chunks taken out of it, a few stray rocks still littering the glacial floor. The cave was empty save for him, Filza, and the guard, and Wilbur had a feeling this was the first time in years it had seen visitors. "What is this place?" Wilbur asked, whispering even though there was no reason to. "It was one of the first caves we dug out of the ice," Filza explained, pointing at the stone. Zephyr's Fall is almost completely made of ice, but there's huge deposits of stone and ore between the ice itself. We tried to find those stone pockets and mine them out to get the minerals inside. Reaching out, Wilbur ran his fingers along the ice, wincing at how cold it was against his fingertips. The stone was only somewhat warmer than the ice, with craggy chunks catching his skin and making him pull away out of fear that he might cut open his hand. "Come here," Filza said, moving further away from the train car. Wilbur followed, still staring at the walls in awe. The lighting above their heads shifted from shades of white to a bright blue, and Wilbur wasn't sure why Filza tapped his shoulder and pointed to the ceiling. Looking up, Wilbur gasped. The ceiling was covered in glowing blue stars. They were embedded in the ice itself, shimmering in a way that reminded Wilbur of his own freckles, stretched far across the ceiling and deeper into the cave. Some of the stars trailed onto the walls as well, stopping right at the edge where the stone met the ice. It was one of the most beautiful things Wilbur had ever seen. "Bioluminescence," Filza explained, the blue light casting a soft glow over his face. Bacteria that were frozen in this ice thousands and thousands of years ago just naturally glow like this. One of the ways we would find stone pockets was by looking for the glow, because the bacteria always tend to cluster close to the deposits. "It's amazing," Wilbur whispered, wondering if his own freckles matched the constellations in the ice. "I had a feeling you'd like it, little bird," Filza chuckled. Wilbur's eyes shifted away from the stars above his head and down towards the walls. His gaze drifted past the glowing ice and back to the stone, where he noticed some markings embedded in the gray rock that he hadn't seen before. Narrowing his eyes, Wilbur stepped closer. Although it was difficult to make out in the dim lighting, he realized it was words, names specifically, carved into the stone in a towering list. "The miners carved their names into the wall here when they got close to the end of the stone deposit," Filza told him. "How long ago was this cave shut down?" Wilbur asked. A pause. Then... long time ago. Huh. That made sense. But Wilbur wasn't sure why Philza had seemed hesitant to tell him that. His eyes drifted along the names, not expecting to recognize any of them. Only some were written in common, while the majority were written in languages he didn't know. As he read the different markings, though, his eyes caught on one name, and his breathing hitched. Puffy. Was that a coincidence? That one of the miners had the same name as the captain of the Royal Guard? Wilbur wasn't sure, but then his eyes caught on another name. Some of the names were unreadable because the stone had crumpled, leaving only a letter or two behind. This was one of those names. It sat right underneath Puffy's, with the majority of the stone it had been written on having been knocked out of the wall. All that was left of it was the first letter. P. As Wilbur straightened back up, he felt a dark wing rest over his shoulders, blocking out the chill that had threaded itself under his shirt. And although he wanted to push it away, he didn't. The ache in his chest was unbearable. Wait, so that's what I mean? Like, Phil was one of the miners that... Like, Phil was a miner before he became emperor. Puffy and Phil. Huh. Interesting. Man, Bones and the Bees. Great chapter. This is Bones and the Bees socials. Be sure to follow her on those if you really like the story. And I think that is going to be my stream. My throat is shot. Man, I'm glad that I was able to stream today. I wasn't sure if I would. But it's been really fun. But I'm a bit tired. And I have plans in a few minutes. So thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe or follow. Following's free. But if you want to support me, you can subscribe for a discounted price during September. So, that's cool. I don't, as always, I'm not sure when I'm gonna be able to stream next. We shall see. And I will let you know on Twitter the day of, usually an hour or two beforehand. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's Claymation with 3 N's. So, yeah. Or you could type in !socials and go to my link tree and find my Twitter that way. Alright. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night, and I will see y'all next time.